I definitely had one question around the yields. Like, they've obviously compressed a lot from around that 8 to 9. It's going down to say 6 at the moment, as you mentioned. Is that like, what's your feel around? Like, do you feel they'll retrace back to that sort of level, or this is the new normal moving forward?
I actually think it's a new norm, and the main driver for that is there are so many more investors in the commercial space now. Like 5 years ago, if I mentioned the word commercial, guys like you would just look at me blankly being like, nah, not going to touch it, too high risk. Now, like, I've sold 12,000 books in stores and given away about 15,000 as well. Like, there's podcasts, there's other kind of buyers agents have books. Like, there's so much more knowledge. So there's more investors coming around it. If you ask for a forecast, I always tell clients when they ask me, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? I say, it doesn't matter. You're owning this for life. So let's focus on the next 10 years. But there's a few scenarios that could play out. Like at the moment, inflation's pretty much 7.2, 7.4%. And we're seeing that translate to rental increase. So like on average, most industrial assets grew between 5 and 20% last year. That's going to keep going. I don't know how long. It might be a year or two and then the steam will come off. But that will creep the 6%. As long as interest rates stay the same, that increase in rent will bring up, say, 6% up to 6.5, 7. So we'll see that kind of go there. There's two scenarios I see playing out. The ideal one is rents keep going up, interest rates come down, market explodes. I don't think that's going to happen. Like that's perfect for me because I've got commercials. I want it to grow. What I actually envisage is probably the interest rates stay about the same. The rents keep going up a little bit. We get up to that kind of 6.5%. And then the interest rate is going to be what dictates moving forward. Obviously, there's all the stuff I'm not an expert at. I'm not an economist. I can't predict when the recessions are coming and all that, but I just buy the fundamentals. Is that property going to be in more demand in 10 years' time than it is now? And you can do that without looking at interest rates and the industries and all that type of stuff. You can just literally do it through population growth if you want.
Yeah, that's a good sort of point around, like, we had one of the senior commercial valuers from here in Todd White on, and he was just mentioning on the Gold Coast that there's a massive undersupply in industrial at the moment. And, you know, obviously with the lockdowns through COVID and the ripple effect that we're seeing where, you know, getting these building materials and also the trade shortages, it's hard to see, you know, supply, you know, outweighing that demand level for at least a number of years. Do you sort of track that as well with like construction rates and everything?
Well, I do because like I'm looking at it all day, every day. And you can also look at like vacancy rates and like there's like CBRE, Savills, Knight Frank, they all do reports. It's generally for 10,000 square meters plus, but it'll give you a good indication. But just going on that, like Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast, most of the areas we're buying is 0% vacancy rates. Zero. So when people say, commercial's high risk, it's not. The benefit / negative is because build costs have gone up so much, developers aren't really developing as much anymore. But part of our due diligence process is to talk with town planners and find out what's coming up. Not so much from the like oversupply part of it. I just want to get an understanding of vacancy rates and kind of what's coming up. But if you buy like an industrial complex and it's surrounded by residential and that residential population is growing and you talk to the town planners and they're building new Westfields and more like medium and high density apartments and stuff like that, how is there going to be less demand for a warehouse? You still need car mechanics, wholesalers, distributors, fabricators, storage, all that type of stuff. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat it for your listeners. Like there's still risks, but you can mitigate those risks with assessing stuff like that. The ones where you're looking at new stuff getting built is when you're buying greenfield sites. So if you're buying on like, I don't know, say Gold Coast, like out in Nerang and those kind of further west areas there where they are building new warehouse complexes, that's going to affect your vacancy rates. But I always just buy like tightly held, low risk stuff.
Yeah, that's smart. I think it's a big shift that people are starting to understand through education, that you can de-risk it a lot. And obviously that's a big part of what we're trying to do here is to get people's head around, you know, get educated in this space, right? And, you know, Jared's going through the journey himself, tossing up, you know, do we keep growing out residential or looking for these high yielding commercial plays?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's going to come down to like what you're trying to achieve and what your borrowing capacity is. Like I had a client a month ago who had $0 borrowing capacity for residential and $2 million for commercial because he had the capital, but he had no servicing for residential. So we got him a lease doc loan. So even though theoretically he might have wanted a residential, commercial is the answer. He has to buy commercial. So that's where you balance. But it just depends where you're at. If you're doing developments or still trying to grow the resi, if you enjoy your job, that surprisingly has a big part as well because people go, I can only graft this job out for another 5-10 years and I'm done. Cool, then we have to start building cash flow anyway. And you don't care, like, you go through waves as well. Like without sounding arrogant, like I've got a big portfolio. I don't care about my net wealth anymore. And because no one's impressed whether you say you got a 3 mil portfolio or a 5 or a 7 mil, it doesn't change your day-to-day life. But I sold a few of my residential properties and transferred them into commercial because increasing 100K passive income to a 200K passive income, I actually feel way wealthier, even though my future net wealth is going to be less because I've got a smaller portfolio because of it. But I don't care. It lets me spend time with my daughter. I did 16 countries in the last 2 years. Like, it gives you some form of lifestyle back as well. But that's just me. Like, if you're a mum and dad client, some people want to pass a property on to their kids or whatever it may be. But I want to live life. Like, that's the whole